Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Good morning. This is Zach in Washington, D.C. Today we are discussing projectors and pixels. Money is no object. That's always a good topic. Equity in COVID, and episode 2 of Bobby Danger, the lighting guy. All on Light Talk.
And this is Ellen in Philadelphia. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk. And we are the Lumen Brothers and Sistah.
Yeah.
That's right. One of our sisters is back. Man, that's great.
Yep.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 235. We got a lot to talk about today, but I know we have some industry news. Zach, Ellen, you want to kick that off?
Well, yeah, I think one of the most exciting things is that the Rolling Stones and Genesis, all these bands are going back out on the road. The No Filter Tours on its North American leg looks absolutely fantastic. Kudos to Patrick Woodruff for once again putting on an enormously great show with the lighting and the creative direction. That's a good one. And Genesis, of course, is a iconic band in our industry because they were the first one to go out with the very first Verilight VL1. And here they are all these years, 30 years later? So it's really great to see them out.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of those periods in time where, especially because of, like the passing of Charlie Watts in the Rolling Stones, that if you're comfortable going to see these bands, go see them. Not just because, we want to support the live music industry, but also because you never know how many more chances you're going to get.
Well, not only that, but I think that production-wise, the Rolling Stones set a benchmark that, maybe Nine Inch Nails, some of these bands do an incredible production job. But, as way far back as Steel Wheels in the 80s or 90s, whatever it was, I think the Stones have really, really set the benchmark, and everybody should go see them. I mean, the huge difference between the Beatles that toured for maybe, 4 or 5 years, and mostly what we know of them is a studio sound, as opposed to the Rolling Stones where there's hours and hours and hours of live performances. And it's a very different experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, as I watch my own kids in their discovering of what we call classic rock, and the whole idea of seeing the live concert and the excitement about what's the same, what's different, how does the production value change the sort of visual storytelling for the songs. It's very exciting stuff. And as much as we love the Beatles in our house, I think that the idea of seeing a band live, we've seen, what was that band called? The Fab Four, which is like the ultimate Beatles tribute band that's made up of the guys from David Letterman's band and Conan O'Brien's band, because I think there's just something so magical about seeing the music live.
Right. And as I always say, it's only rock and roll, but I like it.
Well, I mean, we've come a long way since the days of the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West. I mean, in all fairness to the Beatles, those early tours, I mean, that was about a sound system. You'd go and see this, right, and there was no real lighting system. There were speakers on stage, and there was all these kind of hockey arenas that seated 5,000, 6,000 people. People brought blankets, and they brought right, pillows to sit in. And they sat there, and they sucked on their bongs, and all the lights were up, and they had a good time.
When you look at the speakers that were on stage, you laugh. Some people have bigger bows in their living room. Although
I did see recently the Grateful Dead's famous Wall of Sound is now being auctioned off.
Wow.
So you can own a piece of the Wall of Sound.
Wow.
Does that include cabinets that have no speakers inside them?
I have a feeling that the person who would know would be Stan. He's the audiophile of the group.
Speaking of the Fillmore East, I worked there in the late 60s in New York City. And one night after a concert, a doubleheader with Black Oak, Arkansas and Black Sabbath, I swore I would never go to another concert.
Is that because you lost your hearing at that one?
I was deaf.
Yes.
Well, Zach, you have our first question. Where's it from?
Fred in Boston asks, How do I choose between using a projector or an LED wall? Can you explain some of the differences, advantages or disadvantages of each? This is a great question, and the answer has really kind of evolved over the years as the quality of each of these separate display devices has improved. Even as recently as 5 years ago, it was much clearer answer in terms of using a projector or LED because of the way that LED looked versus the way projectors looked. You'd say LEDs are brighter, LEDs are lower resolution. Projectors can create something that's a more creamy image. That was a big thing. Wendell Harrington used to tell me all the time that projectors are creamier. But at this point now, I think that a lot of the factors that can go into these things are about, what kind of space do you have? Is there room to fit an LED wall in there, or are you kind of projecting onto something? Are you trying to map your image around a physical object or a piece of scenery? In that case, you're going to probably want to use a projector. Are you doing something outdoors? In that case, you may want to go for something with LEDs. I think at this point now, we've seen on TV, even when they use LEDs, like even recently as the Tony broadcast, that the pixels have gotten so small and the quality has gotten so much better that you really can't even tell the difference when it's being used in broadcast. Between a projector or between an LED wall. So I think you think about your budget, you think about what the application is, you think about what your venue is, if you have to take it apart and put it back together. I think in my heart, I tend to like the way projecting looks more than the way LEDs look, but that's because I'm not old, but I'm old enough. The projector is sort of more romantic to me in a way, because it's like a lighting instrument in a way that an LED wall is not. So I feel like we can do more fun tricks with that and help. We've talked about this in the past, like even using it to augment lighting in some ways now that we have these 40 and 50,000 lumen projectors.
I saw an LED wall years ago when they first kind of came out at LDI, and it was pretty spectacular. The cost was just phenomenal. And I was talking to the sales rep, and I said, I'd kind of like to see this in action. And he said, well, if you will give me a 50% deposit. Now, this is in Las Vegas, mind you, because I assumed he had one in Las Vegas. But he said, if you'll give me a 50% deposit, I will have you on a plane to Saudi Arabia tonight. And we will go there and see, what this beast can do. But it was so expensive, no one in the U.S. had one yet. So has cost come down a lot on LED
definitely.
walls?
I mean, cost has come down significantly on LED walls. It's not necessarily like dollar for dollar equal between projector and LED wall, but there's a lot of other factors that go into it too. When you dig deeper, there's the noise that a projector makes, and then will that projector require some kind of housing? So even if it's cheaper, that may end up making it more expensive than an LED wall. The heat, the noise, those are things that the LED wall does not suffer from.
Well, I guess I have the next question here, and it comes from Robert in Texas. And Robert says, does anyone know what the equity guidelines are for admitting an audience into your theater? Well, the equity guidelines, Robert, are probably not the guidelines we're using in Texas. As far as Texas goes, I've looked at a number of theaters, and they're still talking about some pretty severe social distancing. So they're not trying to pack an audience in there yet. I did look at equity and New York, though, since that's what you asked about. And let me read a little press release here from them. This says the owners and operators of all 41 Broadway theaters in New York City will require vaccinations for audience members, as well as performers, backstage crew, and theater staff for all performances through October 2021. Masks will also be required for audiences inside the theater, except while eating or drinking in designated locations. Under the policy, guests will need to be fully vaccinated with an FDA or WHO authorized vaccine in order to attend a show and must show proof of vaccination at their time of entry into the theater with their valid ticket. For performances in 2021 and beyond, theater owners anticipate a review of this policy, and this may include a relaxation for certain provisions if the science dictates. Exceptions are being made for audience members under the age of 12 and people with medical conditions or closely held religious beliefs that prevent vaccination. If you watch the Tony Awards, I mean, they were packed cheek to cheek watching that. And as I remember, everyone had a mask on. So I think you're going to have to check with your local city council and medical board on what the requirements are. What about Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia? What's happening in those two cities?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar in Washington. I think one of the things that has sort of come out of this is there's now like a COVID awareness or some kind of COVID, someone who's basically in charge of administrating all of the COVID stuff. So it may be your stage manager. There may be an additional person like with the company manager or even the production manager who is responsible for making sure everybody knows the rules for that particular production. Everybody knows what they need to present. Like the big question that a lot of patrons still have is, do I need to bring that little paper card with me? Is there some kind of like digital version of proof of vaccination that I can bring? I know some cities are developing these, what do they call them? Vaccine passports, where it's like a thing in your phone and you can just show that. Or can you show just a photo from your phone of your vaccine? But I think that one of the rules, like I know in particular, someone who's working on the band's visit tour, which is being remounted in Richmond, Virginia right now, and somebody tested positive. So that person has to quarantine for 10 days. But everybody else, even those who are vaccinated, are now getting tested daily throughout this process because of they want to be safe about breakthrough infections. And really, it's just, a lot of this is what I would consider common sense. If you don't feel well, stay home.
Well, Philadelphia has a mask mandate that went into effect on August 12th, and masks are required at all Philadelphia theaters and indoor venues. Vaccination required for all employees and patrons. So in a theater, if everybody that works there is vaccinated, people do not have to wear a mask. If they do not require, if a theater has an audience coming in and everyone is not required to be vaccinated, then there is the mask mandate. And we went to a concert 2 weeks ago. We saw one of the Bob Marley band spin-offs called The Wailers, and it was definitely a mask requirement. You had to show your Vax card at the door, and the poor kids that are normally just ushers were going up and down the aisles with a flashlight like, put your mask up. So they weren't taking any chances.
Nobody wants to be the person who shuts your theater down.
Right.
You just managed to get the thing up and running again. So I mean, everybody's being very cautious. I mean, we're putting chairs 6 feet apart in our two spaces in which we can actually move seating.
Yeah, I think especially on the production side of things, where everyone is just like so hungry and happy to go back to work that nobody wants to be the person that makes it so that everybody can't go back to work.
Okay, this one is for Zach as well. Gary from Denver asks if there's a difference in creating content for a projector or for pixels.
That is an interesting question. When we think about a pixel, the definition according to Merriam-Webster is it's any of the small discrete elements that together constitute an image, such as on a television or digital screen. So it's all the little dots that make up the image that we see. And, we hear a lot about this idea of megapixels, with our cameras and our phones. Megapixel is 1 million pixels. So basically, if you think about a projector that might have a 1080p image, which is 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high, if you multiply those two numbers, you get 2,073,600 pixels, which means that a HD projector puts out about 2 megapixels, image of 2 megapixels. Now, considering that even now we might have a 4 megapixel or a 4K projector that we think is sharp and crisp, the human eye can see 576 megapixels. So that's 576 million pixels. So we're still pretty much light years away from achieving that. But the good thing is that most of the time when we go to see performance, we're not just looking at the projections. Hopefully we're not just looking at the projections. Otherwise, someone's made a big mistake. And our eyes tend to be very forgiving, especially when things are moving around. Your eye is not the most perfect lens that there is. So that's why that sort of 4 to 8 megapixel image looks very, very sharp and crisp and photographic to us, because really we only see the sharpest through the center of our eye, not to the sides. So when you're looking at an image, the things that are off to the left and right in that image are not as sharp as what is in the center. So projector is the device that deploys these pixels, that takes the pixels that are on your computer or on your hard drive or on your CD-ROM or DVD and puts those images using a fancy light onto another surface. And the image itself is made up of pixels, and we figure out the width and height of that, and then we can multiply those to figure out how many megapixels this image is. So basically, that's the short answer for that.
So you mean all the way back to like Pani projectors and all the image was still
see, that's
pixels.
different.
Ah.
See, because Pani projectors use film. Now, if we have any listeners who remember Pani projectors, they all get like bonus credits here. And in the world of film, there's no such thing as pixels, really, because those images are not made up of the same kind of tiny dots because of the way that the paper and the chemical emulsion goes to create those kind of those transparencies. They weren't created in a digital way. They were all, even when they were, it usually had to be photographed to ultimately get it onto that sort of plastic slide to project it. So it was not necessarily calculated in the same way that you would calculate pixels from a digital projector.
If you need a Pani projector, the person to go to is Brackley Frayer at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. About 15, 20 years ago, maybe, one of the theaters changed their shows and told him, I think they gave him 25 or 30 Pani projectors. If he would just come haul them away, he could have them.
Don't tell Wendell.
She probably knows. The very first show that I worked on professionally used slides. The second show used Pani projectors. And then after that, I've only done digital. So I'm very proud to have sort of bridged that gap as things moved from one to the other.
I think we're all aging ourselves here.
You are listening to Light Talk, and today we have a special presentation from the Lumen Community Players, Episode 2 of The Lighting Guy.
Hang on to your sea wrench, true believers. It's time for Bobby Danger, the Lighting Guy, starring Bobby Danger, a.k.a. the Lighting Guy, and his two assistants, Bucky and Becky. And now, Episode 2, The Terrible Tempest. For 3 days, Bobby Danger, along with Bucky and Becky, had labored to light William Shakespeare's The Tempest. But perfection had escaped them. The opening was weak and lacked a certain depth to truly set the tone of the play. No one was happy. Tempers were short and harsh words had been spoken the night before, and tension was mounting among the cast and crew. The opening scene, the very tempest itself, was indeed a terrible tempest. But what to do? Bobby Danger turned to Bucky and said, "Let's see that opening again, Bucky."
But lighting guy, we've seen it a dozen times already.
"Quiet, Bucky. Playback mode, please." And so it began. The stage changed to a dim purple. In the distance on the horizon, a dim flash of lightning. A touch of green light came to life and was followed by another flash of lightning. The director was the first to speak.
Hold, hold, hold. I need a tempest, not a bunch of flashing lights. I need a magical storm. A tempest. Must I cancel opening night?
As if on cue, cast and crew, already pushed to the breaking point, erupted into shouting and pushing and accusing each other of sabotaging the production. During the confusion, Bobby Danger, our lighting designer, stepped into a lobby bathroom. With a blink of an eye, Bobby Danger was out of his khakis and fancy silk tie. He was out of his sport coat, and he removed his Rolex. Then he slipped on black, baggy, multi-pocketed cargo shorts, a black mesh t-shirt, a black spinal tap baseball cap, and around his left thumb, he placed a silver skull ring. Bobby Danger, mild-mannered university assistant professor, non-tenured, had become the lighting guy. Returning to the auditorium, Bobby Danger was shocked to see the cast and crew had come to blows. A fight had broken out. Becky had just delivered a karate chop to the choreographer, who now lay unconscious on the stage floor.
Hi-ya!
She then spun and landed a well-timed wheel kick to stage manager Tracy's head, who fell with a loud crash.
Who's shouting in the headset now, Tracy?
Becky's brownie training had finally paid off, and now she and Miranda were circling each other, both looking for an opening.
I got this, lighting guy. Just save the show.
That moment was all the lighting guy needed. The lighting guy reached into one of the 17 pockets of his cargo shorts and pulled out a thumb drive. Handing the thumb drive to Bucky, he said, "Bucky, program like you've never programmed before. Sync this up with our lighting cues."
But lighting guy, what is on this thumb drive?
"Quiet, Bucky. Just do it. For Pete's sake, just do it. Do it now, man."
Wow, lighting guy, it's a soundtrack.
"That's right, faithful programmer. I have been minding my time, waiting for the right moment. And now it's time to pull out the aces. My friend Sound Guy gave me this before we started the tech, just in case we might need it."
All ready to go, lighting guy. Just give me the word.
"Playback mode, Bucky, and go." And so it began. As the lights dimmed, the fighting stopped, and all eyes turned to the stage. The stage changed to a dim purple. In the distance on the horizon, a slight, dim flash of lightning. And now a rumble of distant thunder was heard. A touch of green light came to life and was followed by another flash of lightning, followed by the roar of thunder. The tempest had begun. Still recovering from Becky's golden crane blow to his head, the director stumbled to his feet and said,
Thank you, lighting guy, for saving our show.
"I don't need thanks, good artist. Wherever there's a dark spot, or an awkwardly staged moment, or a timely blackout is needed, well, that's where you'll find the lighting guy." A loud thud was heard as Miranda collapsed to the floor. Becky was settling old scores.
Hi-ya!
Tune in next month for episode 3, The Terror on Stage Right.
Oh, I'll be sure to do that.
Yes. I feel like I know this guy.
Yeah, everyone knows that guy.
It's the cargo pants. You can't get past the cargo pants.
It's the thumb drive.
Oh.
Personally, I would have slipped into some Lululemon yoga pants, but
The sound of those rabid ducks means it's time for Let's Talk About. And today's Let's Talk About topic is the Tonys. Well, what did you think, guys?
Well, I think that It was a pretty good show. I mean, first and foremost, I feel like this year's Tonys, more than anything else, was about letting the viewers know that Broadway is back. I mean, they put it right in the title. I think we want to let people know that you can come see a Broadway show, and there's amazing stuff currently playing and coming down the pike. I already have my tickets for Music Man for next year with Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster. And one of the things that I really liked this year, which was kind of like a throwback to the old days, was just because of the way that they had to produce it, the scenes from the different Best Musical nominees took place in their own theaters. There's always that discussion that you have when you're working on a show and you're nominated for Best Musical of how you're going to recreate your scene on the giant stage of Radio City Music Hall. How, like, I remember in Xanadu when we were trying to figure out how are we going to recreate the scene in Xanadu on this enormous stage when we're doing it in a 500-seat theater. And then coming up with the budget to build your little miniature version of your show to do there. So getting to really see the actual designs of those shows, to really see the lighting and the scenery for Moulin Rouge, for me as a viewer, I think was really special treat, as opposed to seeing a facsimile of it that would be reassembled for Radio City. And I think that when I saw those scenes, for me also, I was sold on those two, which happened to win for lighting and scenery. I knew it was cool, but then when I saw it, I was just really blown away.
So what was the story with the musical awards? There was no original score?
Yeah, I don't totally understand. I mean, I know that Moulin Rouge's music is made up mostly of pre-existing songs that are kind of weaved together, which is why they deservedly won the Orchestrations Award. The other side of the discussion for me is it's sort of like, was it really the right idea to have these awards? I mean, you had a category for Best Actor in a Musical with one person in it.
Right, from Moulin Rouge.
Right, and he still could have lost.
Right, if he didn't get 60% of the votes.
Right.
Right.
So,
he did not, however, lose.
no, he did win. And he's
wonderful.
Yeah, he is. And he's also really good in Schmigadoon. If anyone out there who has Apple TV Plus, they should watch Schmigadoon.
That 60% mark, you bring up a really good point. Our friend Justin Townsend was nominated both for Moulin Rouge in the lighting category, and he was also nominated for Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah.
Right.
So he could have taken himself out.
Right.
And it's amazing.
But
beautiful work.
Yes, his work is always beautiful. And if I may, a shameless plug, on Thursday, October 7th, we are having a live webcast on Live Design called Celebrating the Tonys Lighting and Sound Design, with a sound session moderated by Abe Jacob with Tony Award winner Peter Helinski and Jonathan Deans, who was also nominated. And on the lighting side, it'll be Justin Townsend talking about his award-winning work on Moulin Rouge. So go to livedesignonline.com and register for that. It's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what about the split between Paramount Plus and CBS? What did that mean?
That was confusing, because I wasn't sure where I was supposed to go and what to watch when. And I guess also because it was on a streaming platform, you could only watch it live at first. I think that and I've heard from some people, it's too bad we don't have Stan here, because I heard that in Florida that the second half of the Tonys was preempted by a football game.
Oh, dear.
It wasn't a football game. It was the Green Bay Packers. It was the football game.
Game. Excuse me.
Well, you bring up a good point because, I'm going to be Mr. Negative here for a second. Are we past award shows? Are award shows slipping away from us? I looked at the numbers on this, and I'm sure you guys saw it too. This was the lowest viewing of a Tony Award ever. 2.6 million viewers.
I mean, I feel like that this year, at least, there can be an asterisk for that. Like they get what is it called? A mulligan in golf.
Okay.
Because aside from the confusion of like people not knowing where to watch what when, that it's like, you're doing this. We're still sort of in the middle of a pandemic. Half the shows that were nominated have been closed for over a year. Some have not yet reopened. Some are not going to reopen. So it's really not the same. I mean, the challenge for the Tony Awards in general, which does sort of talk to your question about whether or not we're in a post-awards world, is that in reality, it's awards for New York theater. So while it may be the biggest stage and the ultimate goal for anyone working in theater to end up on Broadway, that it is still basically a regional awards show in a way that's very different than what it was in, like, let's say the 1960s, where you'd have people who were like, yeah, I did a few movies, but Broadway is really where I belong. That now, I think we're going to see a lot of Hollywood people coming to be on Broadway in the next few years as a big boost in visibility. But I think that in some ways, what we saw this year was more interesting and could potentially be a way of reinventing the Tony Awards, in that it became more of a celebration of Broadway and not specific to this season only. We had that really nice duet sequence where they had, Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth did their thing from Wicked, and the really, really great thing from Ragtime. That was excellent.
And Rent. And that was a great duet from Rent.
Right. So it was really more of a celebration of Broadway as an art form. And I think that kind of thing might be the way to reinvent and keep alive this kind of award show.
Well, I have another question, which isn't really lighting related, but one of the big snubs they said this year was that Slave Play, which was nominated, I think, in several categories, maybe up to 10 nominations.
12 nominations.
12, did not win anything. But it really was, a seminal kind of a play on Broadway. And if I remember correctly, I think I read that every new play opening this season is by a Black playwright. So why is the one from last season snubbed like that? Is Broadway not woke?
That is a very, very challenging question to answer. I wish I had my wife here, who is a social worker and specializes in dealing with these kinds of things.
Right. It's a rhetorical question, but it'll be interesting to see what happens next year.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think that there's definitely merit to the people who were nominated, and there's merit to the people who won. And I feel like I mean, part of my argument is, I know in the past that there's always the question of, like, did the voters actually see all the shows, or are they just voting for their friends? Are they voting for what they heard was good?
I don't think you can vote. You really have to go.
But in this case, you have to remember what you saw a year and a half ago. I mean, that's a challenge.
Well, that's true. Some of the, like a jukebox musical like Tina or Ain't Too Proud are wonderful shows, but once again, not original scores. So it's interesting. I mean, Moulin Rouge, I suppose, is sort of a souped up, film turned into musical, right, with a lot of hit songs.
There was the original musical 6, which I think was supposed to open like a few days after everything got shut down. It was like on the cusp.
Right.
And they didn't, so they were not eligible. I mean, the other thing with 6 that I think is an interesting thing to note, just as a side, is that when we talk about shows doing an out-of-town tryout, that 6 did an out-of-town tryout on Norwegian Cruise Line as opposed to a regional theater.
Right. I think that's very interesting because you get a lot of people from a lot of different places.
Right. And I think that that's a model where we might see more of.
Interesting.
You and David called it right last week. because you had seen American Utopia before I saw it. Mm-hmm. And if you noticed last night, there it was, American Utopia with the special Tony Award.
Yep.
Well, it's a brilliant piece, really wonderful piece.
Yeah, they've reopened for a 6-month run now at the St. James Theater.
Right.
I mean, that kind of piece is something that I think is really important for Broadway, in that you brought all these things that don't necessarily, we don't think of as traditional Broadway. You've brought people who've never worked on Broadway before, and because they're unaware of the rules, that they don't even know they're breaking the rules or changing the rules, and they can do something completely fun and original and unique and engaging that tell the rest of us, like me, who is like thinking about Broadway in the more old-fashioned sense, that there's all different kinds of ways to entertain an audience. And I think that that's really a wonderful thing, and I love to see more of that in the future.
Right. And then you have Lin-Manuel Miranda. I don't know what his pitch was on Hamilton, but getting to go perform the song for Barack Obama at the White House sold it.
Yeah, absolutely.
When do you think the Broadway committee is going to, the Tony committee is going to change their position on designers? You know, it seems to me that years after you've seen a show, Tommy, for example, I will never forget the opening sequence that Wendell Harrington has done. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I think a lot of people go to Broadway and they see shows, and long after they've forgotten who sang in them or acted in them, they remember scenery, lighting, costumes, sound, projection design. And again, this year, it's like, oh, yeah, we got some designers hanging out in the green room, and we're going to ramble off their names really fast. And, it's like, one reviewer said it was like an announcer giving you names from a pharmaceutical. It was the pharmaceutical side effects at the end of the commercial. It just seems a shame that they can't seem to find, 10 minutes in the evening to let these people accept their award and be honored for the achievement that they've done.
Right, and the stage would be awfully sad without them.
It's true. I mean, they used, for the time, there was a couple of years where they would do like the awards for designers in the hour before the broadcast. So they would actually get a chance to speak, but nobody would hear it. But the nice thing is that the American Theater Wing put all of those speeches up on their website. So if you did want to hear what those designers had to say, unfortunately you had to go dig around for it, but that it was actually captured for posterity, that it's out there to be seen.
Well, I remember one year they ran it as sort of little vignettes in the middle of the real broadcast.
Right, yes.
Well, I think it's, going full circle back there, Zach, it's how you began this. How does the design team figure out how to move their show to that stage and find a budget and capture the essence of that show for those few minutes at Radio City Music Hall? They're reliant upon these people to deliver the goods, whether it's on Norwegian cruise lines or at the Winter Garden.
But the flip side of that is that from a marketing standpoint, the more awards your show is nominated for, the better that looks on that big marquee. You want to say nominated for 12 Tony Awards, not nominated for 11. So we may not celebrate the the lighting designer or the sound designer on the Tony broadcast, but I think that producers are certainly happy that sound design is back as a category, because that's another number they can add to the total.
And when they add projection design, that will be one more.
Sure.
And when is that day going to come?
I think it's scheduled for next Thursday. No, I don't know. I mean, the other part of that is the joke that I often make is, when you listen to the orchestra, you want to be able to enhance your experience of listening to an orchestra. You want to be able to understand and appreciate the different instruments that are in it. So if you're listening to, Rhapsody in Blue, that little clarinet thing at the opening, if you know that it's a clarinet and maybe you even know who the clarinetist is that's performing it, that's going to enhance your experience there. And if you went to see it and that person didn't show up and there was no clarinet, you'd be like, there's a hole in this music. There's something missing from it. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that when the Tony voters go, we should turn the projections off and see if they can tell the difference. But I mean, in some ways, all of these parts go hand in hand and piece by piece to make this world that's on stage. And if we can, learn how to appreciate the different elements that make that up in a better way, then maybe we'll be able to identify things more independently in terms of rewarding people for their efforts.
It's interesting you say that, because with Hamilton, I think 3 of the 4 designers won a Tony: lighting, sound, and costumes. The set, however, did not. Nominated, but not a winner. And there was a campaign at the time called Tony, Can You Hear Me? Because when the Sound Awards were taken away. And I wrote a little piece for Live Design called Tony, Can You See Me? And I'm like, how on earth could they not award that set, which is the envelope for the most brilliant production that's been on Broadway probably ever, in my humble opinion. And I thought that without the set, the lighting, sound, and costumes would have been adrift, really.
Yeah.
And it is a package. It's absolutely a package.
Yeah. I mean, that's why some people say they wish that there could just be like a best design award, because it's about the teamwork. I mean, in theory, as a designer, I can certainly look at the collected work and say, well, that's a beautiful set that's lit poorly. But when you get to the level of these Tony-nominated musicals, it's like everything is working together so perfectly. It's like it's like a fine watch movement, and if any spring or cog is missing, then the whole thing would fall apart. But it all is every contribution is holding the rest of it together. So it's really hard to say, like, this was the best musical with the best orchestrations and the best lighting and the best costumes, but not the best scenery. I think it's hard to say how to do that. And I guess, back in the day when, the janitor was the lighting designer because he knew where the light switch was, and they didn't have those awards, and it sort of developed over time. In many ways, it's sort of a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid. So rather than figuring out new ways to define how to reward these individuals for their efforts, they just keep adding more categories. So maybe adding a projection category is not necessarily the right way to approach this, but who knows? We'll see.
All right. Well, Zach has our next question.
So Barbara in Port Jefferson asks, I'm working on a musical at my local theater with a very limited budget, and we only have one spotlight operator. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to handle duets or songs that feature more than one performer? So this, I think, I'm sure Steve has plenty to say about, and this is a problem that is not just yours, Barbara, in Port Jefferson. I think that we've had this issue on Broadway in New York. It just all comes down to the creativity of your lighting designer and your spotlight operator. So what do you think, Steve?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to solve this problem. And the first thing is the director has to be on board, because it really is the director who's going to provide a lot of the solution to your problem. I think, so you've got one follow spot. So obviously you can bounce around the stage and pick people up, but that's not going to be very satisfying, I think. The director can stage his play or his musical so that people have a home base to go to sing. Maybe you have a down left and a down right special and something at center. Sometimes the director is going to stage the performers together so that they're not wandering around the stage. You can also go kind of nuts, and maybe you can do a musical without follow spots in it. Rather than trying to make one follow spot kind of do something poorly, just I don't have any follow spots. And you start creating an environment and, as David says, an atmosphere for these numbers to take place in. So I would look upon this, and I truly mean this, I would look upon this as an opportunity rather than this is a problem.
Steve, I think that the first thing you said is absolutely key about having the director aware and on board about this, because I think first and foremost, since in that designer-director relationship, you want to manage the expectations too, and you don't want, like, the third day of tech when the big duet happens and the director turns to you and says, why is the leading man in the dark, to then tell him, after 3 days, we only have one follow spot. That's why I can't do that. It's a team effort to figure this out. And you may find that you have a very inventive follow spot artist as well. You know, when we first did Rock of Ages off Broadway, we only had one follow spot and we didn't even know it. It felt like we had three. She was so good at catching everything that needed to be caught. So, you know, I think that it just takes a little extra thought and time and trust and patience to make sure that everything that needs to be illuminated is.
So, Ellen, I think you have our last question today.
I do. Claudia from Chicago wants to know how to pick a lighting console, and is price always a deciding factor?
In some ways, this is like the Mac versus PC question. You know, I think I'm typically, when I walk into a theater that does mostly traditional theatrical stuff, you're going to see something from ETC. You're going to see an EOS, you're going to see an Ion, something like that. And then when you walk into a theater that does more large-scale events and corporate stuff, you're probably going to see some kind of Grand MA. Thinking about the kind of people that are around that you're going to hire, I think is part of this, the kind of shows that are coming through. You know, if you're bringing in shows that, like a Broadway touring house, let's say, they're most likely going to be created on an ETC console. So you're going to want to have some flavor of that, is my guess. I mean, that being said, there are a gazillion and one other consoles out there besides those two. Those are just the two that I think you see most frequently. You know, I always talk about the Jan's Vista console, which I'm always interested in because it uses a timeline, which is, you know, the core of programming anything in the video world is with a timeline. So I have yet to actually encounter a Jan's Vista in a theater, but I know that they're out there and I'm always curious.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of, you know, European and other consoles. The Ava lights are certainly popular in the rock and roll world. So and of course the Grand MA comes from Germany. So I do think it's a question of price. And like you said, what kind of shows is it for? Is it for a house of worship? Is it for a rock and roll show?
At the university level, Steve, what do you see often as the console of choice? Because that's another factor is, you know, if you're talking about like people that have just come out of grad school, what's the console they know? Like, what's the console they had that they know?
Well, I think ETC did a brilliant job in putting a console into every middle school in the country. And that has followed students into high schools, and it's followed them into universities. But and I'm going to say that, you know, if I were a college student today, I would turn my gaze toward Grand MA, and I would learn how a Grand MA programs, because I think that is such a versatile console. It's just expensive. So, you know, here at SMU, we have Strands Neo. We use the ETC Geo. We have a couple Grand MAs, and we have a Hog. So the idea is that you train on all those consoles over the 3 years you're here. And it's interesting because no matter what that student comes in with, you know, if they come in and they're a heavy Grand MA user, then, you know, we turn them loose on the Geo. And they complain and they complain until they get to understand what that console is capable of doing. Or we turn them loose on a Hog, and they're a Neo user. And they talk about how horrible the Hog is until they get to know what it does. So I think the more you know about the equipment that you're going to be designing with, you know, you have to be smarter than the light, and you need to be a little bit smarter than the console so that you can get the show you want out of the equipment you're using and not be blindsided by it. So maybe the answer to Claudia's question is she needs to simply shortlist it to the 4 or 5 major console companies, get a sales rep in there and say, you know, this is what we do. How can you help me solve my problems? And I think that's the question you ask them, Claudia. how can you help me solve the problems I'm facing
Right.
with the console I have now?
Yeah.
And then just see where it falls.
That's a good way to go.
There you go.
Maybe they'll fly her to Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
That's right. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again, you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, Live Design Online, Amazon Prime Music, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
no guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
If you do decide to litigate, the law firm of Flecht, Flocked, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and just left of the Chisholm Trail.
And be sure to join us next week when David, Steve, and the gang chat about more useless things and explore the crazy shenanigans in our industry.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
See you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye.
Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk. Light Talk. Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk. Nice.